Welcome, curious minds. Today, we're embarking on a fascinating deep dive.
Hmm?
We're looking into a sector that touches cultures, economies, and, let's be honest, our taste buds around the world.
Mm-hmm.
The global vine and wine industry. We're pulling back the curtain on the very latest data, literally straight from the International Organization of Vine and Wine, or OIV.
That's right. Our source material for this deep dive, it comes directly from the OIV's press conference. That was April 15th, 2025, presented by their Director General, John Barker. It gives us a really comprehensive snapshot of the 2024 data, plus some initial estimates for 2025, too, specifically looking at the Southern Hemisphere for those early 25 numbers.
And our mission today is, well, to cut through all those numbers, all that data, and really extract the most important nuggets of knowledge for you. We'll cover everything from, the land where the grapes actually grow to what ends up in your glass and how wine moves across the globe. You're going to get the shortcuts to being truly well-informed. And maybe some surprising facts that might just change how you think about your next glass of wine. So if you're ready to uncork some serious insights, let's dive in. Okay, let's begin right at the foundation, the global vineyard surface area. For 2024, the OIV is reporting a total of 7.1 million hectares. That's dedicated to grape cultivation worldwide.
And that covers all types of grapes, right? Non-bearing vines across something like 93 countries.
Exactly. And just to give you some perspective, 7.1 million hectares is, well, it's roughly the size of Ireland, the whole country.
Huh.
But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. It's the trend this number represents. That 7.1 million hectares, it's actually a 0.6% drop just from 2023.
Just in 1 year.
Yeah, and a pretty significant 9% decrease since the year 2000. So the overall picture is we're seeing less land globally dedicated to grapes.
Mm-hmm. And it's quite revealing when we look at where these vineyards are actually concentrated. The European Union, for instance, accounts for a huge chunk, 46% of the global total, while the Southern Hemisphere holds about 12%.
Right, and country by country.
Well, Spain leads the pack with 930,000 hectares. Then you've got France at 783,000. China's right up there at 753,000. And Italy at 728,000. But it's also interesting, to see countries like Turkey with 402,000 hectares, and even India and Romania have quite substantial areas, over 170,000 hectares each.
It certainly paints a picture of a, well, dynamic landscape, doesn't it? So given this shrinking footprint, this consistent decline, what are the broader implications, for the future of wine, maybe for different grape varieties or regions?
Well, it suggests a few things are probably happening. Could be a shift in priorities, could be responses to various challenges. You might see a move towards more efficient, maybe higher yield vineyards in some places. Or it could be a reaction to oversupply in others, leading to vine removals.
Right, market forces at play.
Exactly. And for specific grape varieties, it might mean, well, traditional varieties are facing more competition, maybe from grapes that are more resilient to climate change or just more in demand by the market. Or you could even see some consolidation,
Right.
smaller vineyards becoming less viable economically. Ultimately, it signals an industry that's really adjusting to a whole range of pressures: climate, market demand, economics.
Okay, so moving from the vine itself, the land, to the wine, let's talk production. The OIV's preliminary data for 2024 puts global wine production at 226 million hectoliters.
And a hectoliter is 100 liters, so that's what, about 133 standard wine bottles per hectoliter. A lot of wine.
A lot of wine. But looking at the bigger picture here, what does this number signify? That 226 million hectoliters, it's a 4.8% decrease from 2023.
Wow.
And this is the crucial part. It's the lowest production recorded globally since 1961.
1961.
Yeah, think about that for a moment. We haven't seen production volumes this low in over 6 decades.
Wow. Which leads us to the big question: why? Why such a significant drop? The report primarily points to atypical meteorological events. Weather, basically.
It's not just a one-off bad year, though.
No, and the OIV highlights this. They talk about continuous fluctuations in production over the long term, influenced by both climate change, things like frosts, hailstorms, extreme heat waves, drought, and also technological development. But those weather events can just devastate harvests, makes production really unpredictable. The EU is still the powerhouse, producing 61% of the world's wine. The Southern Hemisphere contributes about 20%.
And when we zoom in on specific countries, the variations are really striking, aren't they? I mean, Italy actually topped the charts in 2024, 44.1 million hectoliters, and they were up 15% from 2023.
Right, they had a better year, relatively speaking.
But then France, a huge name in wine, saw a massive 24% decrease, dropped to 36.1 million hectoliters. The USA also saw a pretty big dip, 17% down. But on the flip side, Argentina kind of bucked the trend, didn't they? Up 23%.
Yeah, they did. And what those numbers really illustrate, I think, is just how vulnerable harvests are to weather, these huge year-over-year swings. You mentioned France and the U.S. down, but look at, say, China's production compared to its 5-year average down over 53%, Greece down 40%. It really underscores how these climate events can hit different regions disproportionately hard.
Even if some places do okay, or even better than average.
Exactly. While some, like Hungary and Brazil, saw positive jumps against their 5-year averages 17.5% and 19.7% up, respectively, the overall story for 2024 was definitely one of significant environmental challenge for producers. They're constantly having to adapt.
Okay, so production's way down. Let's shift gears now to consumption. What are people actually drinking? The global wine consumption in 2024 is estimated at 214 million hectoliters. So what's the practical upshot of this for you, the consumer?
Well, this figure, 214 million hectoliters, it's a 3.3% decrease from 2023. And mirroring production, it's also the lowest level seen since 1961.
So low production, low consumption, same time frame.
Exactly. And the primary reason cited by the OIV this time, inflationary pressures. The cost of living biting into discretionary spending, presumably.
And what's particularly compelling here is looking at who's actually drinking the most wine. In absolute terms, the USA remains the world's largest consumer, 33.3 million hectoliters, followed by France at 23.0 million, and Italy pretty close behind at 22.3 million.
And the EU as a whole.
The EU collectively drinks almost half the world's wine, 48%. And while most of these big consumers saw slight decreases in consumption, China was actually an outlier. They saw a 7% increase. Though it's important to remember that's starting from a much lower base level. Right. But what about per person? Was there a surprising statistic you found when looking at per capita consumption?
Oh, absolutely. It's quite revealing. Portugal takes the lead by a significant margin. Each person there, aged 15 and over, consumed an average of 61.1 liters of wine in 2024.
61 liters. Wow.
Yeah. Italy's next at 42.7 liters, France at 41.5. But then you compare that to the USA, which is down at 13.7 liters per capita. And China, despite that absolute increase, per capita, it's remarkably low, just 0.5 liters, half a liter per person per year on average, which is a huge range in how integrated wine is culturally.
Definitely. Okay, so putting this in a broader context, there's a significant gap now between global production, which was 226 million hectoliters, and global consumption at 214 million. That gap is 11.6 million hectoliters, and that gap itself dropped by 25% from 2023. The OIV attributes this production-consumption gap to market rebalancing and industrial uses. Can you elaborate a bit? What do those terms mean in practice?
Sure. Market rebalancing essentially means the industry is trying to align supply with this changing lower demand. That could happen through various ways, maybe reduced planting, maybe government programs paying growers to pull out vines, or just producers deciding to make less wine.
Okay, adjusting supply and industrial uses.
That refers to diverting surplus wine that isn't going to be drunk as is, so it gets used for other things. Often it's distilled into industrial alcohol or spirits like brandy. It can also be turned into vinegar or used in cooking wine or even find its way into like pharmaceutical or cosmetic products. It's basically how the sector deals with oversupply to try and stabilize prices and, avoid simply wasting the product.
Got it. Okay, so from production and consumption, let's explore how wine moves across borders. International trade. For 2024, the total volume of international wine exports was 99.8 million hectoliters. That's actually a tiny decrease, just 0.1% from 2023.
Almost flat in terms of volume.
Almost flat. And the value of these exports was 35.9 billion euros, also down slightly, 0.3% from 2023. But here's where a key insight really emerges. Despite those slight dips in volume and value, the total value recorded in 2024, that 35.9 billion euros, it was still the third highest value ever recorded.
Wow, okay.
And the average export price per liter stood at €3.60. That's the second highest ever recorded. So volume slightly down, value slightly down, but still historically very high prices and total value. What does that tell us about the market?
Well, it points very strongly to this trend we call premiumization. It suggests that even with, geopolitical uncertainties, inflation, lower overall production, Higher value wines are being traded more. Consumers, or at least the importers supplying them, seem willing to pay more per liter. It suggests a shift towards quality over just sheer quantity in the global trade.
Focusing on higher margin products, maybe.
Exactly. It shows the market adapting to those economic pressures by trying to maximize value rather than just volume.
And how does that premiumization play out when you look at different wine categories, like bottled wine versus bulk wine?
Yeah, that breakdown is really quite revealing. So, bottled wine, defined here as wines under 2 liters, makes up about half, 51% of the total export volume, but it commands a massive 67% of the total export value.
Okay, so half the volume, two-thirds of the value.
Precisely. Then look at sparkling wine, only 11% of the volume, but it accounts for a really significant 24% of the value. Huge value driver there. And then on the other end, you have bulk wine shipped in containers over 10 liters. That represents 35% of the export volume, but only 7% of the total value.
Wow, big difference.
Huge difference. It really demonstrates the vastly different price points and market dynamics. I mean, the average export price for sparkling wine is the highest at €7.90 per liter. For bulk wine, it's just 80 cents per liter. Massive contrast.
Okay, and looking at the league tables for 2024, top exporters by value.
Italy leads there, 21.7 billion euros. Spain's actually second by value at 20.0 billion, then France at 12.8 billion.
Interesting. Italy and Spain ahead of France by value, but by volume.
By volume, France shipped the most, 11.7 million hectoliters, then Italy at 8.1 million, and Spain much lower by volume at 3.0 million. And on the import side, by value, the USA is number one, bringing in 6.3 billion euros worth. But by volume, Germany leads, importing 12.7 million hectoliters. They import a lot of that bulk wine, often for bottling domestically.
So zooming out again, what does all this trade data reveal about how wine moves globally?
Well, the OIV has this measure called the Market Internationalization Index, and it clearly shows this is a highly globalized sector. On average, just looking at the last few years, 2020 to 2024, 47% of all wine consumed globally is imported.
Almost half.
Almost half. And that represents a huge jump, 30 percentage points higher than it was back in 1990. So it really indicates a deeply interconnected market. Production in one country is increasingly being consumed, far, far away from its origin.
And there's re-exporting too, right?
Yes, significant amounts. We see global re-exports averaging about 14 million hectoliters, worth around 4.6 billion euros between 2018 and 2023. It just showcases the complex supply chains and distribution networks that are at play to get wine from a vineyard, potentially through several countries, onto your table.
Fascinating. Okay, to wrap up our look at the numbers, let's turn our attention briefly to the immediate future. The OIV gave some first preliminary estimates for wine production just in the Southern Hemisphere for 2025. And there's actually some positive news here, isn't there?
There is, yeah, a glimmer of good news. Total Southern Hemisphere wine production is estimated at 47 million hectoliters for 2025, which is a 2.6% increase compared to their 2024 figures.
And that includes all the big players down there.
Yes, countries like Argentina, Chile, Brazil, South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand.
So what's the significance of that early estimate?
Well, it's definitely a welcome sign, especially amidst those overall global declines we saw in 2024. It suggests that while the Northern Hemisphere producers were really grappling with those atypical meteorological events leading to some of those lowest production levels in decades, the Southern Hemisphere seems, at least preliminarily, set for a bit of a rebound in 2025. It really highlights the regional variations, doesn't it? And the cyclical nature of agriculture. Challenges in one part of the world don't always mean a global downturn everywhere at the same time.
Right. So let's try and unpack what we've discussed today. We've seen a global wine sector that seems marked by paradoxes, really. We've got shrinking vineyard area, historically low production, historically low consumption. Yet at the same time, a resilient international trade that seems increasingly driven by premiumization and a market that's more globalized than ever.
Exactly. The OIV's data paints this picture of an industry that's really grappling with some serious environmental challenges, climate change being a big one, and also significant economic pressures like inflation impacting consumers, but it's also clearly adapting and evolving.
Yeah, we've highlighted the crucial role of those weather events, haven't we? And the inflationary pressures and that undeniable shift towards higher value wines and trade.
Indeed. And those striking contrasts, between the overall consumption trends and the incredibly high per capita consumption in certain countries like Portugal, plus the very distinct roles and values of bottled versus bulk wine. It all just shows the sheer complexity of this beloved beverages journey from the vine right through to our tables.
It really reveals a wine world in flux. deeply intertwined with global economics, climate patterns. It's almost a testament, I suppose, to how adaptable and resilient an industry can be, even when facing, well, pretty unprecedented challenges. So thinking about all this, given the ongoing impacts of climate change, which seem unlikely to disappear, given those persistent inflationary pressures that might continue to squeeze budgets, and this seemingly paradoxical trend of premiumization happening alongside declining overall consumption, what does the future of wine really look like, both for the traditional powerhouse regions and maybe for emerging areas? And perhaps more intriguingly, how might innovation, whether that's precision agriculture and new grape varieties in the vineyard, or maybe new sustainable packaging solutions on the shelf, how might that shape what's actually in our glass and the whole experience of wine in the years to come? We'd love for you to maybe ponder that thought as you go about your day. Until next time, stay curious.